So the author Walker Percy was once asked in an interview, why Catholic? And his response was, what else is there? He was born and raised in the Lutheran Church growing up. It was a very traditional church, a lot of liturgy, readings of scriptures. I was actually an acolyte, so I got to light the candles at the beginning of the service. So I had fond memories of that growing up. Shortly after my parents were separated, I started attending the Methodist church with my mom, who also sent me to church camp as a teenager at about age 14, I think. And that was the first time I think I ever heard real testimonies of kids my age going through the same kinds of struggles, temptations as I was, who talked about their coming to Jesus and accepting Jesus into their heart, and which was an idea that just haunted me for years, but something I sort of buried underground. And then finally at age 18, I had what I would call a born-again experience where I finally really surrendered my life to Christ and had a pretty profound conversion, turning away from the old into the new. And then at that time, I started attending a Baptist church where I was promptly rebaptized. As I attended college, I started attending Assemblies of God church, got married, later attended an evangelical covenant church where we still maintain a lot of friendships to this day. And then moved to Ireland for a few years where we attended Church of Ireland church, and part of a wonderful community where we made some really deep friendships there. And moved back to the U.S. in 2010, where we started attending a non-denominational Reformed evangelical church, which later became Mars Hill Church, sort of a hipster sort of church, a lot of rock music, celebrity pastor sort of at the center of it. So that was about a total of almost 10 denominations, well over a period of 10 to 15 years. So when I think of conversion into the Catholic Church, I don't really like to use the word conversion because that implies more of a 180-degree turning away from something and then becoming something completely different. But I think of coming into the Catholic Church as more of like a homecoming, coming more, I guess, into the completeness of the faith. Because I never felt like I really turned my back or turned away from the wonderful experiences and lessons I learned in my Protestant background, but it was sort of, it brought those things to fruition in the kind of a fully sacramental, fully liturgical way for me. I think the tide really began to turn during our 3 years that we'd spent in Ireland, because it was during that time that I got to know a lot of Irish Catholics. I was part of a Bible study group, a men's Bible study group, where actually most of the men were what I would call Bible-believing, evangelical, charismatic Catholics. And I'd always heard of Catholics being just going through the motions. They're baptized, and then they forget about what happens after that, and then they just kind of coast through. But these were men who were just on fire. They were lit up for sharing their faith and encountering Christ. And now I wasn't quite convinced yet, even after having conversations with these with Catholic friends, but it was at that point that I realized that I couldn't ignore Catholicism. I was invited by a couple Catholic coworkers that I had who invited me actually to this traditional Latin Mass. And it was probably the first full Mass I've ever been to. And I had no idea what was going on in the Mass, but it struck me as just profoundly meaningful. It grabbed at me. There was something about the reverence, the centrality of the Eucharist happening in the Mass. And it was at that point I guess I knew that not only could I not ignore Catholicism, but I could not avoid what I would call it now. This is the inevitable, the irreversible slide down towards the Catholic faith. During Lent, I think it was Lent of 2013, I joined the RCIA class and read through pretty much almost the entire catechism. And so it was during the Easter Vigil of 2013 that I was came into the church, I was had my first confession and first Eucharist. So I would say first begin with the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I think there's really no better source that brings together so much, and this is a copy I have. It's a nice compact version. I spent a lot of time in coffee shops reading the Catechism, and I occasionally go back and reread it, and it's just a wonderful book. It's saturated with Scripture. It has quotes from the early church fathers, so there's this not only Scripture, but there's the conversation around Scripture, which goes back to the beginning. Just a great explanation of many of the doctrines of the faith that are maybe more distinctive to Catholics. I would say the other book that was really helpful to me to really understand Catholicism is this book, like as I mentioned, understanding what the early church and the conversation that Scripture has with the early church. And this book by Jimmy Akin, called The Fathers Know Best, is a fantastic summary of some of the early church thoughts around baptism, Eucharist, and the like. So highly recommend that. I think the other thing is just, listen to stories. There's a lot of testimonies on YouTube that you can hear of Catholic converts, and attend a mass, and just watch and observe what's going on.